You're walking through a forest. It's quiet. The birds have stopped singing. A deer freezes at the edge of a clearing, staring directly at you. And for just a second, you wonder what is going through that animal's mind right now. Is it fear? Curiosity? Or is it thinking, why is this guy looking at me? Because here's the thing, we spend an incredible amount of time wondering about animals. We study them, film them, track them, follow them with drones, and obsess over their behavior. But we almost never flip the question around. What do animals think about us? And I don't mean that in some vague philosophical sense. I mean scientifically, neurologically, behaviorally. Because the answer turns out to be far more complex and far more humbling than most people realize. Here's what nobody tells you when you visit a zoo, or feed ducks at a park, or go whale watching for the first time. You're not the only one having an experience. On the other side of that interaction, something is happening too. Behind those eyes, information is being processed, evaluated, remembered, filed away. An opinion is being formed. And today, we're going to explore what that opinion might actually be. Let's start with something that may make you slightly uncomfortable. Animals are watching you right now. Somewhere in the world, a crow is memorizing a human face. A dolphin is recognizing a specific person. An elephant is deciding whether a human can be trusted based on an encounter that happened years ago. And no, those aren't metaphors. They're documented findings from some of the most fascinating animal cognition studies ever conducted. And together they point toward the same surprising conclusion. Animals don't just react to humans. Many of them think about us. So let's go species by species. Because every animal experiences humans differently. Every animal processes us differently. And some of those discoveries might completely change the way you think about what it means to be seen. Let's begin with crows, the animals that never forget a face. Crows, the animals that never forget a face. If you've ever been rude to a crow, I have some bad news. That crow may still remember you, and depending on how badly things went, it may have told its friends. That sounds like a joke. It's not. Crows possess one of the most sophisticated social memory systems in the animal kingdom, and a surprising amount of that memory is dedicated to humans. In one of the most famous studies in animal cognition, researchers at the University of Washington conducted an experiment that would reveal just how closely crows pay attention to us. The researchers wore specific masks while trapping and tagging wild crows on campus. Nothing especially cruel, nothing unusual by scientific standards. But from the crow's perspective, the situation probably looked very different. Imagine seeing a group of giant primates show up wearing strange faces and carrying off members of your community. You'd probably remember them too. The truly remarkable part came later. Weeks after the original captures, the researchers returned. They weren't trapping birds anymore. They weren't carrying equipment. They weren't doing anything threatening at all. They were simply walking through campus. The crows immediately recognized them. Birds began calling out. Others joined in. Soon, groups of crows were dive-bombing the researchers and loudly scolding them from above, which is basically the crow version of posting. Warning, this guy again. But the story gets even stranger. The researchers noticed that crows who had never been captured were reacting too. Young birds, new members of the flock, individuals that had never directly experienced the original event. Yet somehow they already knew. The information had spread. Scientists eventually realized that crows weren't simply remembering dangerous humans. They were teaching other crows about them. Parents were passing information to their offspring. Members of the flock were learning from one another. Knowledge about specific humans was moving through the community. Think about that for a second. A crow that has never met you can already have an opinion about you, not because of anything it experienced personally, but because another crow shared the information. You can have a reputation in the crow community before you've even made a first impression. Honestly, that's a little unsettling. It's also incredibly impressive, because what we're looking at isn't just memory, it's something closer to culture, a kind of social knowledge passed from one generation to the next, and it works both ways. Crows don't just remember people they dislike, they remember people they like. Researchers and bird enthusiasts have repeatedly observed crows behaving differently around humans who consistently treat them well. They approach closer. They appear more relaxed. They vocalize differently. Some even leave gifts, bottle caps, buttons, small, shiny objects. One person reportedly received a googly eye, which is either adorable or evidence that crows have a sense of humor. Scientists are still working on that one. The important point is that crows do not view humans as a single category. To a crow, humans are individuals. Some are dangerous, some are trustworthy, some are generous. Some should probably be avoided. And those judgments can last for years. That's a remarkable level of social intelligence for an animal many people still dismiss as just a bird. So what do crows think about humans? The honest answer is probably the same thing humans think about humans. Some are great, some are terrible, and most fall somewhere in between. The difference is that crows might actually be better at keeping track. And if that idea feels a little strange, wait until we talk about dogs, because crows remember what you do. Dogs can often tell how you feel. Dogs. Love is real, but it's also complicated. Dogs are probably the animals most of us think we understand. We've lived alongside them for thousands of years. They sleep in our homes, ride in our cars, show up in our family photos. Some people talk to their dogs more than they talk to their neighbors, and honestly, some neighbors make that decision pretty easy. But what exactly do dogs think about us? As it turns out, more than we once imagined. Dogs have spent roughly 15,000 years evolving alongside humans. Over that time, they became specialists in one very specific skill: understanding us. Not just recognizing us, understanding us. Researchers using fMRI scans on awake, trained dogs discovered something remarkable. When dogs smell a familiar human, especially their owner, the reward centers of their brains become highly active. More active than when they smell other dogs, more active than when they smell familiar objects. In some studies, the response was even stronger than many food-related stimuli. Think about that for a moment. To your dog, you may literally be one of the most rewarding things in the world. Not your car, not your couch. Not even that treat you're hiding in the kitchen, you. Which is either incredibly heartwarming or explains why your dog stares at you like you're the main character in a movie. But dogs aren't just recognizing us, they're constantly reading us. Research from the University of Lincoln and the University of São Paulo found that dogs can distinguish between happy and angry human faces, even when those faces belong to complete strangers. They combine facial expressions with vocal tones. They compare what they see with what they hear. And then they make judgments about emotional states. In other words, your dog isn't just looking at you. It's trying to figure out how you're feeling. And most of the time, it's probably better at it than you think. Maybe better than some humans. Dogs can also understand pointing gestures in ways that continue to surprise researchers. In controlled experiments, dogs often outperform even chimpanzees when interpreting human pointing cues. That's particularly fascinating because chimpanzees are our closest genetic relatives. Yet dogs, through thousands of years of living alongside us, became experts at reading human intentions. The leading explanation is surprisingly simple. The dogs that were best at understanding people were the dogs most likely to survive around people. Generation after generation, those traits accumulated. Without realizing it, humans spent thousands of years selecting for emotional intelligence. We made dogs exceptionally good at understanding us, and they became very, very good at it. But it goes deeper than facial expressions and body language. Dogs are also paying attention to our emotional states. Studies have shown that when owners experience stress, anxiety, or emotional distress, their dogs often show corresponding increases in stress hormones. Their cortisol levels rise. Their behavior changes. It's as if they absorb part of what we're feeling. They're not simply observing our emotions, they're responding to them. This is one reason therapy dogs can be so effective. There's evidence that calm physical interaction between dogs and humans increases oxytocin levels in both species simultaneously, the same hormone associated with trust, bonding, and affection. The relationship is not one-sided. Something biological is happening in both directions. Humans affect dogs. Dogs affect humans. And perhaps the most surprising part is that dogs seem to have a sense of fairness. In experiments, one dog would watch another receive a reward for completing a task. Then the second dog would perform the same task and receive nothing. Many dogs reacted immediately. They stopped cooperating. They looked away. They lost interest. Something about the situation felt wrong. The same effort, different outcome. No reward. Researchers believe this may represent a basic form of fairness sensitivity, not human morality, but something surprisingly close, a recognition that unequal treatment matters. So what do dogs think about humans? If we had to guess, it might sound something like this. You are my favorite thing in the world. You are also deeply confusing. Sometimes you get sad for reasons I don't understand. Sometimes you laugh while staring at a glowing rectangle. And for some reason, you won't share your food. Which, if we're being fair, is probably how many humans feel about other humans too. Elephants, memory, grief, and something that looks a lot like wisdom. If crows keep social files on humans, elephants seem to keep entire archives. And the deeper scientists look into elephant behavior, the more difficult it becomes to explain what we're seeing with simple ideas like instinct or conditioning. Because elephants don't just remember, they remember in ways that can last decades. Let's start with something extraordinary. In parts of Kenya, researchers studying wild elephant populations discovered that elephants could distinguish between different groups of humans, not individual humans. Groups. Specifically, elephants responded differently to the scent and clothing associated with Maasai men than they did to Kamba men. Why? Because historically, Maasai communities and elephants had experienced more conflict. The elephants had learned this. Or, more accurately, the herd had learned this. And younger elephants appeared to inherit that knowledge from older members of the group. Think about that for a second. An elephant could react cautiously to a human it has never met, because of information passed down through its social community. That's not just memory, that's cultural memory. And honestly, that's a phrase most people don't expect to hear when talking about elephants. But here's where it gets even more remarkable. Elephants don't only seem to remember danger, they appear to remember relationships. Researchers have documented elephants returning to locations where important events occurred years earlier. Places where family members died, places associated with significant experiences. And in some cases, places connected to humans they knew. Again and again, field researchers describe behaviors that are difficult to ignore. Elephants lingering near the remains of dead elephants, touching bones gently with their trunks, returning to the same location months or even years later, standing quietly, as if something about that place still matters. Now, we have to be careful here. Science cannot tell us exactly what an elephant feels. We cannot climb inside an elephant's mind. We cannot know whether an elephant experiences grief the same way a human does. But here's the thing. The behavior is real. It's documented. It's repeatable. And it's very different from how elephants respond to ordinary objects in their environment. Something is happening. Something deeper than simple stimulus and response. And then there's the relationship between elephants and humans. Because if elephants remember kindness, they also remember cruelty. Rescued elephants that spent years in circuses or logging operations often display behaviors that look remarkably similar to trauma. Hypervigilance, exaggerated startle responses, social withdrawal. In some cases, these behaviors persist long after the danger is gone, long after the chains are removed, long after the environment becomes safe. Think about what that means. A single species had such a powerful impact on these animals that the experience changed how they interacted with the world for years afterward. That species, of course, is us, but that's only half the story, because elephants also form powerful positive relationships with humans. There are documented cases of elephants recognizing specific caretakers after years of separation, walking long distances to greet them, responding with vocalizations associated with excitement and reunion. Some sanctuary workers have described elephants appearing noticeably distressed when a familiar caretaker becomes ill, and noticeably calmer when that person returns. Now, can we say with certainty that an elephant loves a human? No. Science requires more caution than that. But we can say this. Elephants clearly distinguish between individual people. They remember them. They assign emotional significance to those relationships, and they maintain those relationships across time. That's important, because it means elephants are not simply reacting to humans as a category. They're evaluating humans as individuals. Some humans become part of their story. Some become part of their fear. And some become part of their memory. Which brings us to a fascinating question. What happens when an animal doesn't just remember us, but actively studies us? Because that appears to be exactly what dolphins are doing. Dolphins. You are being studied. Here's a thought that might keep you awake tonight. What if dolphins are studying us the same way we study them? Not exactly. Not with clipboards. Not with research grants. But in their own way. The idea sounds strange at first. After all, humans are supposed to be the observers. We're the ones with the boats, the cameras, the notebooks, the scientific journals. We're the ones collecting the data. At least that's what we like to believe. But here's where things get interesting. Wild dolphins have repeatedly been observed approaching research vessels and divers with a level of curiosity that goes far beyond what simple caution would require. They investigate equipment. They watch procedures. They follow divers, sometimes for extended periods of time. And in certain cases, they've even been documented mimicking human movements. Not randomly, not occasionally, but deliberately enough that researchers began paying attention. Think about that for a second. A dolphin sees a human performing a behavior, then attempts to reproduce it. That's not the behavior of an animal that isn't interested. That's the behavior of an animal that is paying attention, very close attention, and it gets even stranger. In controlled research settings, dolphins have repeatedly demonstrated an ability to learn experimental rules with surprising speed. sometimes so quickly that researchers have had to redesign the experiments themselves. The dolphins figured out what was happening faster than expected, and once they understood the system, they began exploiting it. Which is a polite scientific way of saying the dolphins started finding loopholes. Honestly, if dolphins ever discover bureaucracy, we're all in trouble. But here's the thing. The intelligence of dolphins isn't really the most surprising part. The most surprising part is how they use it. Because dolphins don't just remember other dolphins, they remember individual humans. Researchers have found evidence that dolphins assign unique signature whistles to specific individuals, a kind of vocal label, something remarkably similar to a name. And dolphins appear capable of using those vocal signatures to identify specific individuals across long periods of time. Let that sink in for a moment. A dolphin that knew you years ago may still recognize you today, not as a human, but as you, a specific individual with a history, a reputation, and a place in memory. And that changes the way we should think about these animals. Because dolphins don't live in simple social groups. They live in what scientists call fission-fusion societies. Groups form. Groups separate. Alliances shift. Relationships change. Friends become rivals. Rivals become allies. The social landscape is constantly moving. To navigate a world like that, dolphins must keep track of enormous amounts of social information. Who can be trusted? Who cannot? Who cooperated last time? Who didn't? And remarkably, they appear to extend some of that same social analysis to humans. Studies have shown that dolphins respond differently to people based on previous interactions. Humans who have been consistent and predictable are often treated differently than humans who have been unreliable or disruptive. The dolphins remember, they compare, they evaluate, and over time they adjust their behavior accordingly. Think about what that means. The dolphin approaching a boat may not simply be looking at a strange animal. It may be gathering information, building a profile, updating a long-term assessment, the same way humans do when meeting someone new. And perhaps that's the most fascinating part of all. Because when most people imagine intelligence, they imagine solving puzzles, using tools, learning tricks. But intelligence is also social. It's understanding individuals, tracking relationships, predicting behavior. And in that sense, dolphins appear to be doing something remarkably familiar. They are trying to understand the creatures around them, just as we are trying to understand them. The difference is that we've spent centuries assuming the observation only went one way. It doesn't. The dolphin in the bay is watching too. And if all of this is beginning to make animals seem a little more aware than you once thought, we're not finished yet. Because dolphins aren't the only creatures quietly paying attention. The sky is full of observers too. Crows tend to get most of the attention when people talk about intelligent birds. And to be fair, they've earned it. But one of the most surprising discoveries in modern animal cognition is that many of the abilities we once thought were exceptional may not be exceptional at all. Take the European robin. At first glance, it seems like an unlikely candidate for a discussion about intelligence. It's small, quiet, easy to overlook. Yet studies suggest that robins can develop different responses to different people based on previous interactions. Over time, they learn who represents a threat and who doesn't. Not because they were born knowing, because they learned. And the same pattern appears elsewhere. Magpies, close relatives of crows, have demonstrated an impressive ability to identify specific humans who disturbed their nests. Not humans in general. Specific humans. Which means that somewhere in the bird world, accountability apparently exists. And then there are pigeons. The birds many cities have spent decades trying very hard not to appreciate. Researchers have shown that pigeons can distinguish between individual human faces, even in photographs. Think about that. A bird most people barely notice can successfully recognize people from images. That's not exactly a simple skill. And finally, there are parrots, particularly African gray parrots, animals so cognitively sophisticated that they forced scientists to rethink what communication in non-human species might actually look like. These birds don't simply repeat sounds. In many cases, they use words appropriately. They request objects, identify colors, recognize shapes, and communicate information in ways that go far beyond mimicry. Now, none of this means birds think exactly like humans. They don't. But it does suggest something important. The ability to learn about us, adapt to us, and respond differently to different people is far more widespread than we once believed. And when you step back and look at the bigger picture, a fascinating pattern begins to emerge. Not because animals are watching us, we already know they are, but because so many different species seem to reach the same conclusion. Which brings us to an uncomfortable question. When animals encounter humans, what exactly are they expecting to happen? Because according to a growing body of research, the answer isn't always positive. Researchers studying animal behavior have a concept known as the landscape of fear. And honestly, it may be one of the most revealing ideas in all of ecology. The concept itself is surprisingly simple. Every animal carries a mental map of danger. Certain places feel safe, others do not. Certain sounds signal opportunity, others signal risk. And those perceptions influence where animals go, how they behave, when they eat, when they rest, and sometimes, whether they survive at all. For a long time, scientists assumed that the greatest sources of fear in nature would be the obvious ones: lions, leopards, wolves, sharks, the classic predators, the animals built to hunt. That assumption seemed perfectly reasonable. I mean, have you seen a lion? Until researchers started running experiments. And the results were surprising. In study after study, scientists played recordings of different predators in natural environments. The growl of a lion, the sound of a leopard, the calls of various dangerous animals. And then they played something else, human voices, just ordinary people having conversations. No shouting, no aggression, no weapons, just people talking. And again, the reaction was the same. Animals responded more strongly to humans than they did to many of their natural predators. Let that sink in for a second. Not lions, not leopards. Us. Which is kind of incredible, and a little uncomfortable. A lion is dangerous. A leopard is dangerous. But many animals have spent millions of years evolving alongside those predators. They understand them. They know their habits, their limits, their patterns. Humans are different. Where humans appear, uncertainty appears. And uncertainty can be terrifying, because unlike most predators, humans don't always follow predictable rules. Researchers observed animals abandoning waterholes, leaving feeding areas, changing movement patterns, even shifting the times of day when they were active, all because they detected signs of nearby humans. That's a huge effect. In fact, it was so significant that some scientists began referring to humans as a super predator. And honestly, that's not exactly an award you want to win. Not because humans hunt more efficiently than every other predator, but because our influence extends far beyond the animals we directly interact with. A lion changes the behavior of the animals it hunts. Humans change the behavior of animals that never even see them. Think about that. The impact of our presence can travel through an entire landscape. And here's the uncomfortable part. Many of these reactions occur even when humans aren't actively harming anything. The possibility is enough. The expectation is enough. The reputation is enough. Remember everything we've talked about so far. Crows sharing information, elephants carrying cultural memory, dolphins evaluating behavior. Now imagine those abilities operating across generations, across populations, across entire ecosystems. What kind of reputation do you think humanity develops? That's a difficult question. But it's also the question this entire story has been quietly building toward. We began by asking what animals think about humans. By now, a more uncomfortable question has started to emerge. What kind of humans do they think we are? Because for many animals, humans are not simply another species. We're the species, the one capable of changing rivers, changing forests, changing coastlines, changing the rules entirely. And yet, that still isn't the whole story. Because if fear were the only thing animals associated with humans, some of the next examples shouldn't exist at all. Because if fear were the only thing animals associated with humans, some of the next examples shouldn't exist at all. Take the dolphins of Monkey Mia in Western Australia. For decades, wild dolphins have voluntarily approached humans along the shoreline. Not because they were trapped, not because they were forced, because they chose to. Generation after generation, certain dolphins continued returning to the same area and interacting with people. Think about how unusual that is. An animal intelligent enough to avoid us, repeatedly deciding not to. That's not proof of friendship. Science requires more caution than that. But it is evidence of something important: trust. Or at the very least, a willingness to give trust a chance. And then there are honey guides, small birds found in parts of Africa that participate in one of the most remarkable partnerships in the natural world. These birds have learned that humans are exceptionally good at one thing: opening beehives. Honey guides locate wild bee nests hidden in trees or deep inside rocky crevices. Then they actively guide people to them. The humans gain access to honey. The birds gain access to the wax and leftovers. Both sides benefit. And here's the astonishing part. This relationship may have existed for thousands of years. Think about that. An animal and a human species learning to cooperate across generations. Not through captivity, not through training, but through mutual advantage. It's one of the closest things nature has to a business partnership. And honestly, it's a pretty successful one. There are similar stories throughout the animal kingdom. Researchers working with primates often describe relationships that develop over many years. Animals becoming familiar with specific people, recognizing them, responding differently to them than they do to strangers. Not because the animals have forgotten what humans are capable of, but because experience matters. Individual behavior matters. Trust matters. And that's where this story becomes truly interesting. Because throughout this entire journey, we've been asking what animals think about humans. But animals don't encounter humanity as an abstract concept. They encounter individuals. One person who feeds them, another who harms them. One who protects a habitat, another who destroys it. One who earns trust, another who earns fear. And from the animal's perspective, those experiences become the evidence. The data, the information used to make decisions, just as they do for us. Which means the natural world may not have a single opinion about humanity. It may have millions of opinions, formed one interaction at a time, one memory at a time, one generation at a time. And that brings us to perhaps the most important realization of all. The question was never whether animals notice us. They clearly do. The real question is, what are they learning? What are they learning? That's a fascinating question, because throughout this entire story, we've looked at animals from many different angles. We've seen crows that remember faces for years, dogs that read our emotions, elephants that carry memories across generations, dolphins that seem to study the creatures around them, birds that learn, adapt, and make decisions based on experience. At first, these examples may seem unrelated, a collection of interesting facts, a few surprising studies, some remarkable animal behaviors. But when you step back, a larger picture begins to emerge. Again and again, the evidence points in the same direction. Animals are not simply moving through a world that contains humans. They are responding to humans, learning about humans, adjusting to humans, and forming expectations about humans. That's a strange thought, because for most of human history, we've tended to imagine ourselves as the observers, the scientists, the explorers, the ones doing the studying. Meanwhile, the rest of nature was simply there to be observed. But reality may be more complicated than that. The crow in the tree is learning. The dolphin in the bay is learning. The elephant crossing the savannah is learning. And what they learn influences how they respond the next time they encounter us. Think about that for a moment. Every interaction becomes information. Every experience becomes data. Every generation inherits part of the story left behind by the generation before it, which means that, in a very real sense, humanity has a reputation, not just among people, but across the natural world. And honestly, that's a strange thing to think about. Some animals may associate humans with food, others with safety, others with curiosity, others with danger. The answer depends on the species, the location, the history, and most importantly, the experience. Because animals don't meet humanity. They meet humans, individuals. One encounter at a time, one memory at a time, one decision at a time. And maybe that's the most important lesson in this entire story. The question was never whether animals think about us. The evidence suggests that many of them do. The real question is what conclusions they're reaching. When a crow sees a human, when a dog looks into a human face, when an elephant remembers a human years later, when a dolphin approaches a boat, what story are they telling themselves? We can't know for certain, at least not yet. But the growing body of evidence suggests something remarkable. The natural world is not ignoring us. It never was. It's watching, learning, remembering, and perhaps, in its own way, trying to figure us out. Just as we are trying to figure it out. And maybe that's the strangest part of all. For all the time we've spent wondering what animals think about us, they may have been wondering exactly the same thing. So the next time a crow watches you from a power line, or a dog studies your face, or a dolphin approaches a boat out of curiosity, remember something. You're not the only one trying to understand the world around you. They are too. And somewhere out there, an animal may already have an opinion about you. Let's just hope it's a good one.